Welcome back. June 20th marks World Refugee Day, a day designated by the United Nations to honor refugees and their resilience in rebuilding their lives. Accordingly, in today's segment of Viewpoint, we shed light on the plight of some 7 million Ukrainians who have been forced to flee their homes in Ukraine for safety elsewhere. I have Lee Han-koo from the Korean National Red Cross. Han, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me today.
And I also have Professor Choi Won-geun from Kyung Hee University. Professor Choi, again, it's a pleasure.
Good afternoon.
Right, Han, let's start with you. I understand back in April you were at a refugee center in Romania. Could you tell us a bit about the purpose of that trip and your observations there?
Yes, Sunny. I was in the neighboring countries, actually not only the Romania, neighboring countries of the Ukraine for almost a full 2 months in March and April. Just to help your understanding a bit on the purpose of the trip, let me briefly explain about the history of the Red Cross. Actually, the International Red Cross and Red Crescent movement was born on the battlefield of Solferino in Italy in the 1859. Our founder, Jean-Henri Dunant, shouted Tutti Fratelli, the meaning is all human beings are brothers, and mobilized the local community people to save lives of the wounded soldiers, regardless of their parties, actually. That's the origin of the Red Cross, and now, today, the Red Cross became the oldest and the biggest humanitarian network in the world. So, still, the primary mandate of Red Cross is to save lives of the people on the battlefield in the armed conflict situation, regardless of their nationalities, religious belief, race, and the political opinions. Just back to the Ukraine crisis a bit. Globally, the Red Cross tried to prepare the Ukraine Red Cross. There is a Red Cross in Ukraine, like Korean Red Cross in Korea, to cope with the properly expected humanitarian impact when the crisis occurred. But as all of us have seen so far, the humanitarian impact to the people was much, much bigger than wider we expected. So right after the crisis occurred, almost at the same time, all the Red Cross in the world launched their emergency appeal to mobilize the resources to maximize their capacity to help the affected people in the Ukraine and neighboring countries. Korean Red Cross also launched the domestic appeal in Korea. So far, we have mobilized around 6.3 billion to Korean won, with the active participation of 34,000 individuals and the legal entities. It gave us a huge responsibility to deliver humanitarian assistance to those in need in the most effective and efficient way. That's why I have been there to assess all the situation and the most effective way to deliver our humanitarian assistance. Just I share my feeling from the scene, from my observation. Actually, it's two different ironic feelings I felt. One is desperation, because I could see the thousands of mothers and children fleeing their homes. They lost their home just in a day, and they don't know about their tomorrows. Nobody promised anything for them. I could feel their anxiety through their eyes, because I'm also the father of the little son, so I could feel them, the desperation. At the same time, I could see also strong solidarity shown by the people, not only the people actually, the government, civil society organization, and private sector, the individuals, they gathered all together to support those people in need. So honestly, I could witness the Tutti Fratelli with my eyes on the scene.
Right, brotherhood.
Yes, exactly.
Professor Choi, before Russia's invasion, Ukraine was home to between 20,000 and 40,000 ethnic Koreans, some of whom have chosen to seek shelter here in the country. They're also known as Korean. Could you tell us a bit about them?
Yeah, in early April, around 50 Korean came to Korea, came from Ukraine through Poland, and they finally sought asylum in temporary accommodation in Gwangju, in help with the help of the Korean community there. Well, and it seems like they came to Korea without any preparation, of course, because it was kind of an incident. So especially they came here with probably the overseas Korean visa, not a refugee application process. So it seems like they are not prepared, and so after a couple of months, 2 months later, now they are seriously worried about their livelihood in Korea now. So it seems like it is a very significant moment to Korean government to provide a necessary livelihood support for those Korean groups in Gwangju area. Well, actually, most of the OECD countries use their ODA, the Official Development Aid budget, to support the refugees and asylum seekers in their home countries, which we usually call the in-donor state refugee cost, ODA. So technically, the Korean government have plenty of a budget to support the refugees and asylum seekers in Korea. And there is a group of Koreans really looking for help from the outside. So it is a kind of the assistance is necessary for them. And also Korean government should consider the temporary visa exemptions and the travel cost support for those Koreans considering to coming to Korea to protect themselves from the war.
Right, and along with the Koreans, Han, in total, some 7 million Ukrainians are believed to have left their homeland thus far. What more can you tell us about them?
Yes, actually, according to the UNHCR, it's not the Red Cross, but anyway, as of 19th June, 7.7 million people have crossed the borders to the neighboring countries, looking for just a safe place to live. But almost 2.5 million already returned to their home in the Ukraine, but still 5 million, more than 5 million people are seeking a dignified life in an unfamiliar environment. So, but considering the displaced people in the Ukraine, the number is much increasing. It's much bigger. Almost 15 million people need immediate humanitarian support right now. Of course, a big number means a bigger impact to the human beings. But what I would like to emphasize at this moment is that it is an inevitable choice just to leave. Before the crisis, the older Ukrainians lived like us, like you today and our today in Korea. The older children were going to school, kindergarten, and they're playing with their children. And after work or the holidays, the people gathering all together, enjoying their time with their family and friends and beloved one. Then just in a day, suddenly, this tragedy happened. The affected people, they didn't do anything wrong. It's not their fault or just mistake. All they just innocent victims. Again, for them, it was just an inevitable choice to them. So I just want to ask all the Korean citizens and also you, we need the empathy for the people from this perspective.
Right, and we need greater support, of course. Professor Choi, you mentioned a bit about the efforts by the Korean government to better support Korean Ukrainians. Could you tell us a bit more about that support system that we need to have in place?
Yeah, so basically the core principle of the international refugee protection is responsibility sharing. And as a member of the international community, the Korean government as well as Korean society have a responsibility to protect our refugees. And until the end of May, according to the statistics of the Ministry of Justice, we don't actually see any direct incoming refugees from Ukraine yet. And then also there isn't many people, the Ukrainian people looking for asylum in Korea yet. However, if the war goes longer, then there possibly be a vulnerable people in Korea, especially from the Ukrainian citizens. For example, the MOJ already extended in humanitarian purpose the visa status in February for the Ukrainians living in Korea. So there isn't technical legal issues that Ukrainians continue their studies or business or whatever they do in Korea. But if the war goes longer, the vulnerable groups, for example, students are usually rely on the financial support from the families. So also some of the families with the children might have some financial challenges in Korea. So it is time for the Korean government to prepare those situations and open their mind to support the financial and other humanitarian assistance. Also, I just want to remind the people that we also need care about the possible asylum seekers and refugees from Russian side. I mean, because of the political situations in Russia and the opposition party members or the civil society activists against the war activities could be the target of political persecutions and not only in Russia but also in Korean territories. So we should consider both sides, the Ukrainians and the Russians, to provide international legal protection for those possible asylum seekers.
Right, I see. Han, going back to the refugee centers in the neighboring countries of Ukraine, how are these centers being operated and what exactly is the role of the Red Cross there? Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, sorry, but before answering to your question, I just want to share the information regarding the comment from the Professor Choi, because it's a really good point. Our mandate is the supporting the people in needs and not the targeting one specific ethnic group or the one nationalities. So I thank you for your really good point from the humanitarian perspective. And also I'd like to share the important information. The Korean Red Cross is now currently implementing the unconditional cash program for all the people affected by the Ukraine crisis and currently residing in Korea. So we are just providing the livelihood support for 3 months for any eligible Ukrainian people or the Korean or other nationalities fled Ukraine. So far, only 200 plus people applied for the program and received the cash support. So if any eligible people residing in Korea interested in this program, please contact Korean Red Cross or the Ukrainian Embassy in Seoul for further information. And then just back to your question. Thank you for your understanding. Actually, reviewing the situation in Romania, there are more than 1 million the Ukrainians crossed the border coming into Romania. 90% of the people just on transit, heading to other Western countries, and around 100,000, it's a still big number, which to stay in the Romania. The impressive aspect of this crisis is we cannot find the traditional type of refugee center for mass population. It's because of the solidarity shown by the people, because the local community accommodates all the refugees in their community. The household open their house for the refugees. And just let me share the story, what I have seen in the Romania. In Brașov is one of the cities, name of the cities in Romania. The real estate company opened the whole apartment building for the refugees. So in the whole apartment building, more than 50 households, the 200 people, so most of them are children, of course, can be accommodated in the safe place. So in partnership with these local partners, Romanian Red Cross also runs free community store to provide the integrated support depending on the changing needs of the people. Because the needs are changing depending on the season and depending on the time. Because there was a winter, they were fleeing Ukraine, but now it's summer. Now they need the summer clothes. Like this, the needs are changing. So depending on their needs, this community center provide any kind of support what they need. In partnership with the Romanian Red Cross, the Korean Red Cross ensures appropriate and sustainable operation of 4 centers in Romania. And also adding to that, Korean Red Cross is in close contact with the Ukrainian Red Cross. Thank you for the digital technology from this perspective. And based on the needs and demands identified by the Ukrainian Red Cross, we have provided more than 15,000 milk powder for infants and also 19 emergency relief vehicles to support humanitarian action on the field in Ukraine.
Right, I see. Professor Choi, back here in South Korea, it's been a decade since South Korea passed the Refugee Act, and it's been 9 years since its implementation. That being said, how far have we come in our efforts of offering refugees a chance to rebuild their lives here in South Korea?
Well, unfortunately, there aren't many changes since the beginning of the Refugee Act. I mean, of course, the Refugee Act itself was a huge, big progress to institutionalize the refugee protection norms in Korean legal system. But as you just mentioned, the implementation is facing a big challenges in Korea. I mean, there were some positive changes, of course. One example is that the Korean government started the resettlement program. This is the second time in Asia after the Japan's pilot program. So every year, 30 to 50 refugees are invited by Korean government to come to start their new life here. And Korean government and many NGOs provide various support for them. So that's a good changes. However, there are still things in a challenge. For example, the number of refugees recognized in Korea and the rate of the refugees from the asylum seekers are still way behind than average number of the developed countries. Well, also the Korea's refugee status determination process, which we call the RSD process, is somehow need much space to improve because, for example, the transparency and the professionalism in RSD processes is kind of in challenge. I mean, just a couple of years ago, one of refugee advocacy group, the Refugee Rights Center, Nansen, unveiled the manipulation of the refugee interviews and an interpretation report. That was a big scandal in the refugee status determination process. But after the court decision, the hundreds of the refugees get a second chance to apply their refugee status determination. So it was a good thing to change. But anyway, it shows there is a lot of the legal and institutional changes still need in Korea's refugee screening systems. Also, I just want to point out the economic and social rights of the asylum seekers and refugees in Korea. I mean, the law allowed Korean government to provide economic and social support for those people, but still, in practice, the budget and other programs are way behind than the expectation of the asylum seekers in Korea. So they are having daily challenges in every moment of their life. So it is time for the Korean government to consider to support the social and economic rights of the refugees and asylum seekers.
Right. Hopefully that support will come in the near future then as Ukraine is suffering. I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today, but Professor Choi, thank you very much for your thoughts. And Han, thank you so much for being here and raising awareness about the situation over in Eastern Europe.
Thank you.